All right. Can everybody see the PowerPoint?
We're good.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So today you are in for a treat. It is everything TABE. So we're going to be going through the TABE essentials today. So if you're new to adult education, this is going to be a great starting spot for you. If you've been in adult education for a while, hopefully you'll get a couple new tools and resources that you can utilize for that TABE assessment. Okay, so I guess our first question here is just what is TABE and who uses the TABE test? And guys, please feel free at any time, interject, ask questions, use chat. Jennifer, will you monitor that chat for me?
Absolutely.
I see we've got one. I love your student. I know what you're talking about. But yeah, guys, so what is TABE? TABE is that assessment that we give to our students when they first enter into our programs. Is a basic academic, I say assessment, and I try to use that term commonly with my students because that word test kind of scares them a little bit. So it's an assessment. It gives us an idea, a starting spot of where our students are at when they enter into our classrooms. Now, they take that pre-TABE, and that is generally TABE 11. Okay, there are some exceptions if you have a returning student from the previous year and they tested in 12, but we're not going to touch on that. That's going to be for our testing coordinators. But generally our students start with that pre-TABE, and usually it's book 11. Okay, and then after 40 hours of general instruction, they take what's called the post-TABE. And it's going to be TABE 12, and it's going to be the same subject areas that they worked on previously. And we're hoping to see an MSG gain, that measurable skills gain, okay? As that tells us we're making some progress, that maybe the things that we're putting in place in the classroom is really working for them, and that they're on the right track, okay? So who uses the TABE test? Pretty much every adult education facility in Aiken County uses this TABE assessment to gauge where their students are at. Remember, in order for them to be a registered student, a participant, then they have to have that TABE assessment. So their hours don't count until they take that initial TABE assessment. Any questions on just what is TABE? And we're going to get into the more specifics here in just a second. That's just the general. Okay, then we'll keep on rolling.
Well, I got a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's always competitors. What is it? Is it like another state use something else like this? I'm from the state of Georgia. I've only been in South Carolina 3.5 years. I didn't do GED, and I was a high school teacher. Is there does TABE go as far as Georgia, or is there like a competitor, like another name?
So there is. I don't have a great wealth of information for you, but first off, welcome to South Carolina. We're glad to have you. But I do know other states use what's called the CASAS test.
Okay.
And I'm not exactly sure the format. It's kind of like if we're comparing. So some states offer the GED test and then the HiSET test. So there is a competitor in this field of pre-assessment of your students. But South Carolina, as far as I've known, I've been in adult ed in South Carolina for 10 years now. We have always used the TABE. It is the only thing that I know. But like I said, I do know there is a competitor out there for assessing the students when they initially enroll, and it's called the CASAS.
Basically, TABE won the contract with South Carolina. That's how it works.
In my book, yes.
Okay.
Jennifer,
okay.
do you have any other feedback on that?
I mean, it seems like more states are TABE than are CASAS or however it is that you say it. It does seem like there's more, but the tests are so very, very similar, like in content and whatnot. So yeah, but that's my understanding is the same as yours, Rebecca.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I know, good question. All right, so I just lost my mouse. There we are. Okay, so TABE 11 and 12 content. Here's what you can be testing with your students. Now, this is a program decision as to what tests that you administer when your students first enroll. I'm in Aiken County. We are trying to build more of the TABE language test. Okay, so generally speaking, when a student enters your program, they fill out the registration form. Okay, then the next step is for them to take the TABE assessment. And I think the norm is usually definitely math. So they'll take that pre-TABE and math. And you can see here kind of the things that are geared on that math test and what they're looking at. And then a lot of programs have introduced the reading test as well. So a lot of students will take TABE math and TABE reading, and teachers, that gives them a score to kind of work with and a starting point to see where their students are entering in. Now, there is another test that's not really highly utilized, at least I haven't seen it, but we are trying to implement it a little more, and it's TABE language. And I just, my personal feedback. So this year, I've had a couple students at the beginning of the year that their tests were rolling over from the previous year, or they were a returning student and maybe they did have to redo TABE, but I kind of already knew their levels on math and reading. I expected some summer loss in terms of the learning, but I wanted to see language, because language is a big area of study for me this year. I don't think students are excelling as highly as I thought they were for those grammatical questions, and definitely the writing component of GED. So I wanted to get an assessment score for language. And I'll tell you, it's been a little eye-opening. Where I thought my students would be much higher, they are not. They are level E and RM2. So I have not, as far as I can recall, I've not had a student score in the level D book in language. I'm not saying it's not possible, of course, but the students that I've tested, which is probably about 8 students, that language is proving more difficult. So it's a neat assessment to try out. I think the big thing with TABE 11 and 12, I know for us, when they come and do these assessments, they can definitely do the math and reading in one day, depending on the student. You do have some students that take a little longer and may break these tests up. But if you are looking to do all 3, then you may have to take multiple days. But remember, we are trying to get our students to those 12-hour mark, so they are considered a student. So these are great assessments to kind of give them in the beginning when they're enrolling into your programs. I say that as a pro, and I say the con is, of course, we don't want to test them to death when they first enroll. We don't want to overload them. So take it with a grain of salt there. But there's the 3 tests that are, again, 3 assessments that are available for TABE 11 and 12 content: reading, language, and mathematics. Okay, and again, please infuse questions as we go along. Okay, so what I want to take you to real quick in these links, guys, so this PowerPoint is already uploaded in Brightspace. So if you were able to navigate to the link this morning to get to the Zoom meeting, in that same course shell under October, you will see session resources and you will see this PowerPoint. So these are linked there. Now, we highlighted some of these in our last Brunch and Learn session. But again, I just want to quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I quickly want to kind of look at some of these resources that we have available to us. These come straight from DRC. So these are from the test makers of TABE. Okay, so you've got a couple sample item pages, and I am going to go ahead there. Did my screen, are we on the internet now? Good deal. Okay. So again, now this comes from, if you're just trying to Google, tabetest.com, and that's going to be the official resources. Of course, if you Google TABE test 11, 12, there are a lot of open educational resources to kind of help guide you as well and help your students. But I would definitely start here, so you have that blueprint, because I do think, you know, sometimes sites, and I know with GED sites, you know, you put them on some practice from other websites, and the content, it's not exactly what we know to be present on these tests. So start here. This is a great starting spot. Okay, so here's TABE 11 and 12, some sample practice items. Again, this is from DRC. So this is coming straight from the makers of the test. Okay, let's back up a second and let's talk about these levels here, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. We said this is TABE Essential, so we got to understand what these letters mean. They've thrown out TABE 11 and 12. Now, TABE 11 is just your pre-assessment. It's a book. It's the initial book. TABE 12 is just the second test. Okay, so that's just the 2 different books.
Can I add on some real quick there?
Yeah.
It's an embarrassing story about myself. I started in, of course, 11 and 12, and I was firmly convinced that 11 referred to 11th grade and 12 referred to 12th grade. And then, later come to find out, no, it's just literally the form of the test, like they're on the 11th and 12th version. And it's not that one is easier, one is harder. It's just there are two separate forms called version 11 and version 12, and those are the two current ones. So it has nothing to do with junior year and senior year, which I thought for an embarrassingly long period of time.
It is tough. It's tough to navigate some of these words. When I started adult ed, we were TABE 910 edition, and then we switched to TABE 11. And I was like, why do we use these numbers? Why can't we say TABE A and B or test 1, test 2? But anyway, they picked these numbers. That's above my pay grade there. But yes, so TABE 11-12 is just the form, the book number of the test. Now, there's only two. There's TABE 11, there's TABE 12. So let's just throw this scenario out there. You have a student who's registered with you. They took the initial TABE assessment in book 11. After 40 hours of instruction, you're giving them post-TABE, book 12. They didn't make a game. So after 40 more hours of instruction, where do you go? They're up for another TABE assessment. If they didn't make their first game, which we're calling our MSG, or measurable skills game, they need to reassess. And at this point, they reassess in book 11. Okay, so if they pre-test in book 11, post-test after 40 hours, 40 hours in book 12, they do not make a game, they then go back to book 11. Okay, so it's only the two books. There's no after 12, there's no mystery version or anything like that. So they would be seeing the same test again if they were taking it for that third time. Okay.
Can I jump in? It's Marie.
Absolutely.
Lord, no, I forgot what I was going to say. No, so one of the reasons I give both tests for pre-assessment is for that very reason. Because number one, also 40 hours is a recommended instructional time. You don't have to test at 40 hours. And it's so important that we know that and observe that, because if it takes 10 more hours for the student to be ready for post-test, then you want to do that. Because one of the things we're trying to do is avoid multiple post-tests. And any subject area can be tracked. So if they pre-test in both areas, and the student might have an affinity for both, you can do one or the other. That way you're not doing multiple post-testing, unless you have to.
Yeah, that is a great point. And thank you for bringing that up. Yes, 40 hours is recommended. Now, I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to say this, because I'm a teacher. I get an email, hey, your student's at 40 hours, make sure they're post-testing. My director doesn't like us to wait too much longer. Okay, I mean, he doesn't want to see them get up to 70 hours. Hey, we need to assess them, but definitely just because they hit 40 does not mean the next day they got to go post-test. If you, like Marie said, if you need to take a couple more class sessions to get them prepared for TABE, you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to get dinged, laces. It's not a violation or anything like that. So yes, that is very, very important to note. You may just need to make your director aware that, hey, we're working, and I understand, and we'll be on that page here very soon. The other thing that Marie brought up that is important, yes, you can post-test them in any subject that they tested in. So if they came in and they pre-assessed in math and reading, and even if reading is the higher level for them, if they tested higher in reading, but you want to post-test them in reading. That's what, and for me, that's generally what we work on in those first 40 hours. Because I'm going to be honest, math is that one that we save for the end. So those first 40 hours of instruction, I'm working on the reading skills and, maybe a little science and social studies infusion. So a lot of times I will have them do the reading and not the math, even though the math may be what's stated in LACIS as the lower level, what's being tracked. To make that MSG game for fundable purposes, you can test them in whichever subject you want, that you would like, that you've been working on in your classroom. So, and I'll tell you too, if they don't make the gain in reading, and maybe they're frustrated and you want to switch things up, you can of course try them in math as well. But as Marie said as well, we want to be careful not to over test or exhaust them with tests, because we know adult education, it's what it's all about, is test. So we want to make sure we use that sparingly. So yes, excellent point. Thank you, Marie, for sharing that. Okay, so back to our reading sample here. So I want to quickly highlight these levels, E, M, D, and A. And there's actually another level right below E. I'll be honest, I don't work with those students. Yes, it's level L. So these are, I kind of look at these as your grade levels. So you have L, which is low, which is going to be like, you know, these are individuals who can't read or really struggle with reading skills. So your low literacy. Your E is more of your elementary. M is moderate. D is difficult. And A is advanced. Okay. Now, I think anybody would agree with me. Majority of our students are probably entering right here in this E and M level. Okay. We know we have some work to do in our classes, and that's what the TABE test shows us. So if you have a student that tests pre-assess in TABE 11 and then they get in book E, you know, they've got a ways to go. Now there's some caveats there, of course. Maybe they just didn't have a good test day. Maybe they blew the test off. So there's some things we have to monitor with that in our own classrooms, but that's what the assessment tells us, that they're, you know, they're pretty low, their elementary reading or math skills. So again, that's what these levels mean. And the test will assign that. The student will take the locator test and it will assign them a book level that they go into. Okay.
Rebecca, can you explain basically roughly what grade levels are going with those?
Yeah, but I didn't put the chart in the presentation. I can upload that chart too in our resources. But I guess the big one that I always look at is, because TABE M is huge for us. TABE M is actually your grade level 2nd to 3rd grade. You're looking at a student, if they're getting an M2 in a reading test, in the TABE test, it's a 2nd grade reading level in terms of comprehension, in terms of the accuracy. Yeah, it's a pretty low level. I mean, and with math, I think sometimes we kind of look at that like, yeah, it's probably accurate. For me, for those reading tests, and they're getting that's eye-opening. That was big when I started seeing that, and I really looked at these grade levels. But yeah, M is typically your M2s are your 2nd, your 3rd grade. And remember, M, the book goes up to a level 4, which we'll look at that too here in just a second. But you're looking at your higher elementary there. Okay. Your D book is really kind of those middle school grade levels, your upper 6th, so it can go up to 9th, and then your A is your high school level. So, and I'll be honest, we don't have many A's coming out of our TABE assessments. So we know they're here for their GED, and we know the GED is written on Common Core standards, and you know, it's assessing the high school knowledge that they're supposed to have gained, and they're just not there. So again, as a GED teacher, we've got our work cut out for us, and that's what the TABE assessment kind of shows us. Okay, but I said I wasn't going to talk long on these, but here's some sample items. Like I said, these are great starters to kind of start with. It gives you just a little overview of what your students are seeing when they take that test online. Some good passages to kind of work through. So these are really good to kind of start with. Okay. And they have that for all 3 of those subject areas. So if I come back over here, there's also one other thing I want to highlight really big, because as Jennifer shared an embarrassing story, I will share my embarrassing story. We know majority of our programs are testing online. There, you can do tape, paper, pencil, but I think majority of the programs in South Carolina, with the exception of corrections, is doing online TABE testing. So you don't really probably have this opportunity when your students first take pre-test, the pre-tape. And maybe it's a good thing, because we know we want to just see where they're at when they first come in. But right here is online tools. And again, this is provided by DRC, much like GED. This is an excellent tutorial to kind of run your students through before they go and take the post-tape. So my embarrassing story doesn't relate to TABE, but it relates to GED in the same context. I never went over the online tools with my student. I had a student last year that was taking math online. Well, GED, it wasn't the at home, it was in person. But regardless, I knew, he was doing it on the computer. And we're in class one day, and he had failed the test, and he had failed it twice at this point, 144, 143. And he was working on a program, and I told him, I was like, well, you clicked he said he clicked the wrong answer. And I said, well, change it, click it. And he's like, what? He had no idea that he could, click another answer. He thought the program we were working in at the time did not allow for you to change your answer. You clicked it and it showed right or wrong immediately. And so it's like, oh my gosh, no, you can go back and you can change your answer, you can flag it for review. So at that point in time, I stopped what I was doing immediately and we went to the online tutorial. But this too goes through those online tutorials for each of those subjects. So they're a great tool to kind of run your students through prior to them going back and post-taking. Okay. All right, and then the last thing I want to show you here from DRC and the TABE resources, just to make sure you have access to, are the practice items and the blueprints here. Okay, so again, you have some additional samples of questions for each of the different books over here. The other nice thing for your classroom instruction, if you're designing your lessons and trying to kind of figure out where your students need to be, I will click on the math level M here. This is the breakdown, the score report, where your students are going to get their questions from. So you kind of have an idea of what areas you really, really need to focus on. And then the standards as well. What I like over here is this emphasis level, so you can kind of see. So if it's a lower level, maybe I don't put that much time and effort into that, teaching that skill. But you have each of these, okay? It's also important to look at, particularly for the math, TABE does introduce some ideas or some math skills that are not present on the GED and vice versa. So, if your instruction in your classroom is just GED geared, you may want to pause and go back to this blueprint and just make sure you're picking up some of the TABE math skills that maybe aren't present on the GED. Okay, I mean, for the most part, they're similar, but there are a few differences that you'll see. Okay, much like WIN. I'm sure you guys, if you're working with WIN, you've seen that as well. Okay. All right, any questions? Like I said, this is already uploaded and you guys have access to these links, but those are great places to start. Okay. All right. Keep going here. Okay, so now we're going to get into the real meat and potatoes, I say, of today's Brunch and Learn here. A student has registered. They take in the pre-TABE, so TABE 11, all right? And in just a second, I'm going to show you their school report. And so now they've come to you, they've got their school report in hand, and you are their instructor, you're building the rapport with the student. Now you've got to create a plan of action, okay? What is the goals for the student? How are you going to get them from point A to point B? And also pick up those things that you need, like your measurable skills gain, and make sure you're monitoring your student progress throughout. So create a plan of action. You're going to have a student profile report, which I'm going to show you here in just a second. We then are going to create some learner goals because, and Jennifer, I think will harp on this. She says this beautifully, and I'm going to steal from her, but we, of course, we know we want our students to get that TABE gain. It makes us look good. It gives us money. But some of these TABE gains are hard to get. Some of our students have to make some exceptional jumps in terms of the scale score that they have to get. And so they don't always make that level gain, but they make a gain. And so I think it's important to, part of the goals is to celebrate those small victories. So, making sure when we write these goals for our students and we're, putting this on paper, we kind of build in some of that as well. We then need to look at what instructional resources are available, and Jennifer's going to go over that. And then create that individual learning plan for our students, because the great thing about adult education, good and bad, all our students are coming to us with varied different experiences, varied knowledge. And for the most part, each one is working on, and I know in my classroom, everybody's working on their own pace at their own schedule. And like I may have one working on science GED, may have one working on their TABE, WINT. So it's a mix. So creating those individual learning plans is going to be important as well. All right, let's see here. All right, here's our case study for today. So Jane is a 35-year-old adult learner who recently enrolled in an adult education program. She's completed orientation and her initial pre-TABE assessment. Jane is very motivated to enhance her math skills to secure a better job and improve her overall quality of life. Her score report I'm going to show you is on the next slide. Question today is going to be, how would you design an individual learning plan for Jane? Let me show you her score report. All right. Here's Jane's score. Again, Jane's been out of school for a little minute. So she came in and she tested. And she got a level E. Now, remember I said level E it's pretty low. Okay. So we have to be realistic with Jane here. The GED, it's not going to be this month. Okay. But what this score report does show you here is, the number of points, there was a total of 35 questions. She attempted all of them. She only got 12 right. Okay, so there's the scale score, 429. Her NRS, so she's starting at the bottom. Okay, level E is the level 1 of that is the bottom. Okay. The other nice thing about the score report, this detailed score profile report here, is it breaks down kind of the areas that she was non-proficient, partially proficient, and of course she's got a lot of work over here. But you can see the number of items, number of questions, and how many she attempted. Remember, she attempted them all, and then how many she got right. So we know measurement and data is going to be a big area that we need to work on with her, numbers and operations. And if you go back to the blueprint, remember this will break down what each of these kind of entail. Okay. Okay, so as we begin and we're sitting down with Jane and we're going over the score report, we're thinking of ways to kind of goal set with Jane. Okay, so we've got to identify where she is now. And I think it's important to, again, I said earlier, be realistic with the student. I think that was over the past 10 years, I've learned it's better just be real. When I used to get students and they'd come in with the TABE reports, I'd be like, oh, yeah, we got some work, but you're going to do that. You're going to, we got this. And I tell them, I still say those same encouraging words, but I'm also telling them, like, hey, listen, it's going to take a lot of work on your part. We got a lot of skills to build. Is the GED, our goal may just be to get one done by December, or, maybe just to take a GED ready by December. So I try to be a lot more realistic with my students these days and letting them know that timeline. Because of course, for many of our students, they come in and they want that GED next week, and that's just not going to happen. So where's the learner now? Where does the learner want to go? And where is it realistic that the learner can go in a specific time period? Again, I'll use the term keep it real. So with that. All right, Jennifer, I think I'm going to throw it over to you at this point.
Okay. So if we're thinking about Jane and we're trying to work with her to come up with a structured learning plan that's going to allow her regular in-class support as well as out-of-class study time, if that's something that works for Jane and something that you do in your program. So we've got some great overall resources to help you out. Things like the TABE to GED Bootcamp, that's in Brightspace in the resources section, or TABE to GED Pacing Guide, or Math Bootcamp. I just totally mix those into one thing. Both of which are in Brightspace that can help you, to make sure that your learner is focusing on the most impactful content in a systematic order. There's a lot of material, and you want to make sure that you're, as our administrative assistant likes to say, you're going for the juice is worth the squeeze. So those areas like Rebecca was talking about, those ones that are marked low, you're hitting those, especially if it's something is going to be very beneficial for that student down the road, but you're making sure you're focusing where there's going to be the most impact and what's going to help them going forward. So with Jane, she was an E1. So for Jane to get an MSG, she would need to get her score up to the range of an E2. So when we're trying to decide what content to work with her on, we're going to be keeping her at the E level. So looking for resources in, not even going to begin to read, but all of these that are up here, looking for those ones that are for educational functioning level 1 or for level E. If she were up at the top, like let's say that she was an E2, then E2 is the one going to M3, right? Yeah. So let's say sometimes we get some confusion about what they should be looking at. If they had scored at the very top of a level, like they had scored at an E2, then that would mean that they would be post-testing on, did I say it wrong?
Yeah, so let me throw this up here real quick because I think
I'll
this
put the
will
thing
help
up.
you.
Yeah, I'm trying to do it without the thing.
Hang on one second. Let me switch over.
I figured I was using the wrong numbers.
One second, let me switch my slide and I'll drop this. Actually, let me go ahead and click this link here and drop it in chat.
What she's about to be showing, and I'm just filling in the wrong numbers, but when somebody scores at the very top of the level, like the very highest E, then we wouldn't be post-testing them on an E. We would be post-testing them on an M. So when you're trying to do that first piece of instructional planning, and you'll be able to see it in a second, when you're trying to do that first piece of instructional planning, knowing where the learner is going to be post-testing is huge. So, oh, yep, so I was just off by 1. So like Jane here, she was an E1 on her reading, that was math, right?
Yes, math.
Yeah, she was an E1 in math. So that means that she's trying to get to an NRS level 2. So when we're working with her on material, we want to work with her on E level material because that's where she's going to post test. But let's say that she had been an E level 3. Then in that case, we probably wouldn't want to do much work with her on the E level because she's going to be post-testing on that M level, on that M4. And that can be a really tough gain because that's a long way to go. So not only are you looking at where they are right now, but you're looking at what that next test is going to look like. And sometimes that can be an awkward gap, which goes me back to my normal soapbox of gains are our problem. Increases are where our students can focus because our students, for the most part, can control getting an increase. I mean, yes, things happen, of course, but their score going up, that's them. Getting a somewhat arbitrary gain, that's more our problem than theirs. So I personally like to celebrate with my students increases. If they get an MSG, that's awesome, but that's not what's in their control. Them improving is what's in their control. So you know where you're going. In our case, our person is still staying right here on the E level. And can you flip back when you get a second?
Yeah, you mind if I interject real quick?
Go for it.
So again, embarrassing, or not embarrassing, more, I guess I was hurting the student. When I first started, this is a very important chart for us to have as well. And I'll upload this into Brightspace as well. I've just dropped it into chat. I had students that were testing at M4 pre-TABE, testing at M4, and I knew the test went up to a level 6, and I just had not done my homework and really looked at this chart. And so I'm keeping them in TABE M, and all my resources that I was utilizing, I was clicking on M and doing over those. And there is a difference, and there's a big component with math of the percentage of the test that can be used with a calculator versus what cannot be used with a calculator. And level D really, it's it has some really big differences. So I was testing them, and then even when I would write my test ticket for my students and send them to the testing line, because this was on us at the time, I put post-test in book M. And a lot of times my students were staying the same, maybe even dropping a point or two or going up maybe a point or two, but they consistently got an M4. And I'm like, man, what am I doing wrong? He couldn't make a gain. I needed to tell my testing coordinator to test them in book D. So you gotta, I don't know who at your site, who makes the determination of when they assign them that post test, whether they go in D or M and E. But if you are responsible as the classroom teacher for telling your testing coordinator, okay, I'm sending them down, again, we write slips, they're taking post test 12, and I write the book number out to the side. You need to make sure you're aware of where the limits fall, and then what's the next gain, because all along, again, there was no way for my students to make an M4 gain. They needed to go to TABE D and get a D5. D4 is not a gain. If they were M4, they need to get a D5, which I take a little personal vendetta there, because that's not a really fair, accurate. But again, I didn't make the test, and I just have to play by their rules. So again, do be aware of that. These are the charts. The levels here for each of the subjects. Well, no, and look at this level. Well, yes, each of the levels are the same. So book E goes to a 3. Book M starts at 2 and goes to a 4. So anyway, take note of this as well. And Tracy, I see your hand.
Yes, in that situation, if someone's pre-tested at the end of a level, like if she would have pre-tested at in the E level, but at the NRS level 3, would she not be pre-tested at the M level because she cannot make a gain?
So that depends. Sometimes it'll put them as, I know we have one more question as well. Sometimes it'll state that they're out of range, or there may be the option to re-pre. That's kind of going to be a program level decision. So sometimes folks just want to go ahead and re-pre-test them to go ahead and put them up at that next level to make that a little more attainable. Some programs won't. When you see that plus or that minus at the end of the score on the score report, that's going to give you an indication as to what TABE is recommending. So,
Yeah, so
maybe.
Okay, who's
Yes,
somebody else was
thank
talking.
you. Okay.
We had one more.
I was just
CO?
going to say real quick, Tracy, I tried that. I had a student, I can't remember if it was M or a D book. I think it was an M4 student. And I was like, hey, can they pre-test and can we do that again? And I think it was frowned upon, but I gave it to them anyway and level D. And they pre-tested in D and they got the OR, which doesn't count now. So it's in, out of range. So I was like, man, I tested them for nothing. So there's that, because then if I tested them in M again, they may get the 4. So it's a hard call to make. I mean, you definitely could give them that pre-test again and go up a level and in hopes that they get at that lowest level or that next level. But there is the potential to get that OR score, which means they would have to take it again anyway. So
May I chime in?
absolutely.
So in my experience, I don't pre-test them.
Mhm.
I just start instructing them in the next book. Once you realize that they will need to post-test in the higher level, start instruction in the higher level, or bridge it as much as possible. And as was said before, you might get a score that you might not want to see. Sometimes they'll go down if you pre-test them in the higher level. So you want to make sure you're giving the instructions right away. And can I just add one more thing before I get off?
Please.
There's a wonderful report in LACES called Points to Next Level, which I think is a really good resource for instructors to have when you're goal setting for your students. So you can see how much work they need to get to the next level as you're instructing them and helping them. I always say, guide the students to choose what area they want to focus on. That's it for me for now.
Yeah, thank
Marie,
you.
did you say it was LACES Points to Next Level?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm gonna drop it in chat so I remember.
Yeah, it's in LACES. It's students point to next in the NRS level, if I'm not mistaken, is the title of the report.
Nice.
Very nice. I'll have to look that up. I didn't know that one. So thank you.
So just to kind of, I'm so glad that all of that got brought up. I know in our program, we're very similar to what Miss Morgan was talking about. We tend to just kind of leave it and then just kind of know where, we're going to be going with them, unless we're getting, that out of range or something like that. But, it's definitely a program by program decision. And, if you're an instructor, definitely speak with your director or your testing coordinator, whoever it may be. But as far as, I just had 2 other points that I wanted to just share very quickly about selecting that level of instructional resource. Even when you have those students, like the student that tested at the top of the E, which means they're going to post-test at the M, or a situation like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have anything that you want to cover in that lower level. Because sometimes, and you want to look at that breakdown, because if they were non-proficient in something and it's only being covered there, maybe it's not going to show up on the next test, but they need that foundation. So it's worth looking carefully at those areas and making sure that you're reviewing through anything that they needed at that lower level before you're jumping in on that next level up. The other issue related to that, when it comes to selecting those instructional resources, is the fact that lots of things can happen during a TABE test. especially a pretest. You know, sometimes we get our younger ones and maybe they're not taking it very seriously on that first day of intake, or is that just us? Or, you know, sometimes you have those older learners that this is their first time back anywhere near any sort of testing situation, and they are so freaked out that they're not getting anything wrong or not getting anything right. So sometimes you have a really not accurate level, and that's where we have a really great tool in Aztec called the locator. If you're kind of starting to get the vibe that your learner isn't really in the correct TABE level and you want to put them where they should be, particularly if they should be working on a lower level than they are right now. Aztec has this tool, we all have access to it, called the locator, and it's going to put them exactly where they need to be based on that. So if you wait, once they're settled a little bit, they're a little more comfortable in adult ed, you can give them that and then start working them there. And then you can use that, you know, to also use any of these other resources on here to put them, whether you need something in a book, you know, oh, it turns out they're really an E, let me go find the E level wakelets, whatever it may be. But all of these online resources, you know, some of them, you know, are paid, like your program may have access to something like Essential Education, you know, some of them are free, like everyone has access to those wakelets. And then there's some really good print resources as well out there. And then just, you know, online. I mean, you've got to be careful, of course. You know, sometimes you get some stuff that it's like, wow, that has nothing to do with TABE, or that's kind of crazy. But there are so many good, you know, open educational resources. The links communities as well, like LINCS, they tend to have a lot of good resources linked in, like their discussion boards and forums and things like that. So once you know where you're going, you know what you need them to be working on. And then of these resources, finding what works for them. There's a lot of things on this list, and for good reason. I mean, we have every kind of learner, every kind of person sitting in our classrooms. And so what is the perfect wording, the perfect format, the perfect everything for one learner is disastrous for the next one. So the more that you are familiar with these different online and print resources, then the more you're going to be able to place folks with what's going to be a comfortable interface for them. So, you know, don't be like, oh, I only use blah, blah. Well, that's a terrible idea, because that's not going to work for everyone. Or maybe they've gone through, they didn't get a gain. Okay, now it's time to try a different set of instructional resources instead of showing them the same thing over and over again. So you've got to know your resources, and you've got to know your learners and what works for them. And that's definitely something that comes with time. I did recently learn about, if you already have your learners set up with a GED account, they actually have some like learning styles type inventories available for free on GED.com that your students can access. So if they already have a free GED account, that can be something helpful too, so that you can kind of figure out which software or which types of presentations are going to be more useful for them based on that learning styles inventory that's available there in GED. So I just learned about that this week, and I thought that it was pretty cool. But these are just some of the resources out there. Brightspace, Brightspace, Brightspace. Go in, click on that little green toolbox looking thing on the main page of Brightspace. It says resources, and then they're organized by subject area, by level. And if you can't find something, just reach out. We will help you find it and get it shared so that we can find what works for your particular learner. Do you want to add anything on that, Rebecca? Oh, yes.
Where I work, it seems that 537 for the reading and the math seems to be a significant number, because my administrative always goes to start GED ready in them when they reach a 537. Is there something, I mean, am I making sense? Would there be a reason? Because I do notice the 537 gets over into the level 4.
You're definitely making sense. It sounds like your program may have made a decision that that's where they move them towards that focus. I know in our program, you know, if they're a level 1 or a level 2 or some of the level 3s, we keep our focus more on TABE. Whereas if they're a level 4 or higher, we tend to focus them more on GED, but that may be a program-wide decision. I think Kathy may have something.
Hey, yes. So DRC has done a concordance study, and they have determined that 536 on the reading and 537 on the math, a student at those scale score levels has a good chance of testing right at the 145. So just being at that, low threshold for a GED. I'll put the link for the concordance in the chat so everybody can look at that. But the other thing is our state has also incentivized us for students at that level, and actually even a little bit lower, to go ahead and give some GED readies, because we can be reimbursed for those if they're at those. It's an M4 and a D of any level, and of course an A of any level. Anybody that lands in those TABE levels can have a GED ready reimbursed for by the state. You have to apply back for it, but that is kind of an incentive because we know students can be successful coming in at those levels.
Thank you for sharing that. That is awesome. Yeah, Rebecca.
So yeah, I totally forgot that, Kathy. Thank you. So we have a saying, I just had to go grab it. So if they come in at a 1, 2, or 3, it's a post-test 40 hours. They got to get 40 hours of instruction minimum, like Marie said. But we have a level 4. If they enter in a 4, we have a thing that says 4 out the door, 12 hours minimum. Post-test if still in the program at 40 hours. So a post-test is optional because of all those incentives that Kathy was speaking of. And then our level 5s and 6 are true fast trackers, and no post-test is needed for them. Again, this is our program decision. I think it's for a lot of programs, but 12 hours minimum to make sure they're a registered student with our program, but levels 5 and 6. So that level 4, as you were saying there, those through the scores back up there, that 537 mark, 536 in reading. Yeah, definitely. We've seen that, they have the potential to kind of get out rather quickly. So let me check chat here real quick, Jennifer.
Oh, we're good.
Okay, you're good.
Yeah, we got that link. Thank you, Kathy, for sharing that link in there. Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, and then just, always go back to just remember, these are standardized test scores. So know your learner, just, make sure that you're really comfortable with those numbers before we feel like in our program, we've noticed that the level 3s are kind of a crapshoot. Sometimes they really need that TABE time. Sometimes they're more like that level 4. And the more you get to know that individual, the easier that's going to be. Which leads me to progress monitoring. One more, if you don't mind. Yeah. So progress monitoring is very much key. Teachers can informally monitor a learner's progress through observing their class participation, reviewing their independent practice, and just having conversations with the learner about what they're doing. Teachers can, of course, formally monitor through, periodic quizzes, practice tests, and those sample questions that Rebecca was showing us earlier from the TABE test. Progress monitoring is important because it allows the teacher to adjust the learner's goals for an appropriate level of challenge and provides good opportunities for celebration along the way to maintain motivation. All of the studies over and over again show that learners are going to thrive when they're at an appropriate level of challenge. And so if we're making sure, maybe they took off really quick, with that stuff, and now we're trying to move faster and we need to, challenge more or whatnot. And the more accomplishments that you can see, the more milestones you can see, the more that you're able to celebrate. I like in my classroom, I have a big board that I made out of dry erase poster board, and it has everybody's most recent accomplishment. They finished this, they passed to this, whatever. And then at the front of our room, hanging on our door, we have a big deal board. And whoever the big deal for the day is, maybe they won a classroom game, or maybe they finished a lesson they've been working on or whatnot. Finding those ways to recognize those little milestones is really good for keeping that motivation going. They may not be children, but they respond well to it like a lot of us do. I know I do. And then support and encouragement, providing, just like we were talking about, that positive feedback and encouragement to keep them motivated throughout the journey. And then encouraging them to interact with others in the classroom community or online learning communities to discuss their challenges and share their experiences. One of my favorite things that often happens with my face-to-face learners is when one of them graduates, they'll come back in, a day or two later. Often they bring food, which is wonderful. We had a whole bunch of Wendy's brought yesterday. It was great, from a student who graduated on Monday. But, and they'll share like what they found helpful or where they got stuck. And it's all the same stuff that we're saying. But when it's coming from a fellow learner, especially a fellow learner who has just been successful, that can just be like really, really important, because we can say it until we're blue in the face, but we're not the peer in that setting. And it coming from the peer can be a really big thing. And then, of course, review and adapt. So we've talked about how after 40-ish program level decision, of course, hours of instruction, the learner is going to take that TABE post-test. And based on that post-testing score report, then the teacher and the learner can sit down together to assess the effectiveness of the learning plan and make adjustments based on how things have been changing. So, maybe they've been working in website A. All right, well, now let's try website B. Or maybe they've been doing a whole bunch of stuff on the computer. Maybe we want to try some stuff in a booklet. Maybe we're ready to move up to GED, whatever. But just, by the time you've gotten that post-test, you know that learner a lot better, and that learner knows themselves a lot better. So you know how to adjust to move them to whatever those next steps are. I did just want to take a quick moment before we open up the floor for some discussion. I did want to take a quick moment. Rebecca and I were speaking with some folks from DRC, which is the company that does TABE, this week, and we were talking about TABE 1314. So hopefully this will prevent anyone from ever being in my embarrassing story, since it's not like there's a 13th and 14th grade. But the TABE 13 and 14 are on the horizon. Exactly when that is going to come into South Carolina is, of course, a state decision and potentially a program-wide decision. But when it does come, relax, is basically the message that I got from DRC, because on the teacher's level, and to a certain extent on the administrator's level, it's not going to be that different. The way that the DRC representative described it to me the other day is that pencil paper are going to notice some changes to make it so that they can use the same score sheet, but most of us aren't, using paper and pencil version. When it comes to reading passages, there's still going to be just as many and just as many questions, but the reading passages are going to be shorter. And then there may be some small changes in the percentages that a particular skill or a particular area is weighed. So maybe some changes in that low, medium, high. You'll see some small differences in that pie chart that you see on the blueprints. But as far as the content that's going to be covered and the relative weighting of it, we've been informed by the DRC folks that it is pretty much going to be the same. So, using your 11 and 12 resources, once 13 and 14 comes out, is definitely going to be fine as far as a holdover goes. So, I've been told that 9, 10 to 11, 12 was a big change, but based on everything that DRC was saying to us this week, it does not sound like it's going to be nearly as big of a change going over to this one. Rebecca, did you want to add anything on that? All right, very cool. So we just wanted to we've just got a handful of minutes left. Wanted to open up the floor for any questions or great tips or things that you found that worked, and just, share some best practices or get some questions out there. Kathy, is your hand up or is that old?
That's old, sorry.
Okay.
Jennifer, I wondered if you would say again your motivating boards. I know you said something had a big deal, and what were those two again?
Yes. So the big deal board, it hangs on our door, and it's whoever had a quote unquote big accomplishment that day. That could be anything from they graduated or they passed a GED test to they won a game that we played in the middle of class. So that gets updated each day, and there can be as many people on it that had a big deal that day. Right. And then we keep everyone's, we have a big latest accomplishment, and it's literally poster board. I didn't know this existed. Dry erase poster board.
Okay.
Coolest thing ever. And then everyone's most recent thing is up there. So when they come in, their name's up on there because they started adult ed and that's their current accomplishment. And then, maybe they, their TABE score went up or whatever it may be, or they finished this. And so that way they can always see, I am moving forward and everyone can see that I'm moving forward. So yeah,
Awesome.
the latest accomplishments and the big deal board.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah. Others.
Jennifer, I'm going to ask you, you said it in your presentation the other day, I was listening, and I don't think we all have access to our students prior to pre-tabing. I think sometimes they come in and they're just working with testing coordinators, but I think it's important to note, you said with your online program that you have a conversation with them before they do pre-tabe about whether or not to guess, whether or not to answer everything. Can you highlight that? Because that was important to me to note.
Yeah. So when our folks are, and we, we have this conversation with our online students, but we certainly have this with our face-to-face students as well. We try to make sure that they understand how important it is for TABE to be accurate for them. So, we let them know that we don't want them to leave a whole bunch of stuff blank, because then, just because, maybe they weren't feeling confident on or whatnot, because that might put them in a lower form than they need to be. But at the same time, we don't want them to be this amazing guesser and then all of a sudden they're a level A or something crazy like that. So basically what our director tells them is, if you can make an educated guess, like you can get it down to 50-50, then go ahead and answer the question. If you can't get it down to a decently educated 50-50 guess, then go ahead and leave it. So you don't want them leaving a lot blank, but you also don't want them, doing a whole bunch of guessing and then they're a D4, but they have no idea how to add fractions. That kind of thing going on. So yeah, good 50-50, good to go ahead and go. I take no credit for that. That's all Christy Austin. She's very good at that. Anything else anyone wants to throw out? Got some good stuff. Yes, thank you, Kathy. Don't guess on the locator. Yeah, you can get yourself in a world of hurt that way.
And using the locator for on Aztec, that was something that I like hearing. I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, it won't change, where they are in laces or anything, but it can definitely, especially with the very, very young and the very, very mature, it can be really good because, they're not necessarily comfortable on those first couple of days. But once they've been with you for a little bit, they're kind of relaxed into the routine, you can get something a lot more realistic to really know what they need help with. Yeah, thank you, Aztec. All right, Rebecca, you want to put a bow on it?
Yeah, thank you guys, first off, for your participation. And I got some excellent tips and tricks as well. So thank you. It's a learning experience for all. So again, thank you for joining us. These resources are uploaded in Brightspace already, and you should see that. We will be, if we haven't already, I'll make sure we do that here in just a second, make visible the session evaluation underneath October. You'll see, I think it says October professional development evaluation. If you will submit that, and then that will release your certificate. So you get credit for attending today. By all means, up on the slide here are our emails. Please, if you've got questions, or you just want to share some more amazing tips, please send them our way. Love to hear from them. And TABE is a beast that I don't ever feel totally comfortable with, but I feel I'm getting a little better. So together we will make it happen. So again, thank you for joining us today and our emails, and I hope everybody has a great Friday.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Tracy.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
TABE is a beast.
It is a
I love that.
Word of the day.